Welcome to the Plateau of Plato, your sanctuary for sleep. Anaxagoras stood over the smoking crater, feeling a heat that melted not only ancient stones, but every prejudice. In the year 467 before our era, the sky hurled a red-hot fragment of the cosmos into the land of EURIPIDES on the coast of the Dardanelles. Today this place is called Gallipoli, and it belongs to Turkey, where fishermen now mend their nets and the wind bends stunted olive trees. 2,500 years ago, an event occurred that split both the heavens and human consciousness. Back then, on this narrow strip between sea and hills, the interests of Athens and Persia collided. Greek merchants met Persian officials, and amphorae of grain sat alongside arrowheads. The 33-year-old philosopher from Clazomenae was not here by chance. His family belonged to the nobility whose ships sailed the Aegean, whose warehouses bulged with goods. On family business connected to the grain trade and the political influence of the Delian League, he accompanied caravans and conducted negotiations in coastal garrisons. But neither grain nor tariffs brought him to this shore. Anaxagoras had long ago exchanged the counting of trade profits for the observation of matter's anomalies. EURIPIDES, with its shifting weather, seismic tremors, and wild winds, was his natural laboratory. He studied storms, tides, the rumble beneath the earth, and suddenly the universe itself sent him its most compelling evidence. Anaxagoras knelt at the very edge of the crater. People scurried around him, but he did not notice them. Priests were already dragging sacrificial animals to appease the enraged sky. Soldiers whispered prayers, pulling their heads into their shoulders. Someone wailed loudly. Someone fled away from the accursed place. But the philosopher was silent. He watched the stone's surface cool, its color changing from dazzling white to dull crimson, then to gray, almost black. He reached out his hand. His palm moved slowly, as if crossing an invisible threshold. Finally, his fingers touched the rough, still warm crust. The stone smelled of sulfur and scorching, and the very air around was soaked with that smell. Anaxagoras did not pull his hand away. He held it on the meteorite surface, feeling the cosmos slowly cool beneath his fingers. This was not just a stone. It was a visitor from the void. A part of the world that the ancients called the dwelling place of the gods had suddenly become tangible, measurable, real. Anaxagoras took out his tablets, waxwood on which one wrote with a stylus. He began to record the coordinates of the place, the depth of the crater, the approximate weight of the fragment, its color, structure, smell. He did not pray, he documented. This was an act of supreme calm, accessible only to one who had already ceased to fear silence. Chaos continued around him. Someone fainted. Priests slaughtered a ram, shouting the names of gods who perhaps had never existed. Anaxagoras wrote, and in his mind, slowly but inexorably, a thought took shape that would define his entire life. If stones fall from the sky, then the sky is made of the same substance as the earth. If stars can crash down and lie here on the shore, then they are not divine lamps, but simply matter. Matter obeying laws that can be understood, studied, recorded. He raised his eyes to the sky. Where the fiery trajectory had just blazed, ordinary stars now hung. As cold as this cooling stone. As distant, but no longer alien. Stars are stones. This phrase had not yet been spoken aloud, but it already burned his tongue. He knew that if he uttered it publicly, he would be considered a madman, or worse, a blasphemer. But he also knew that from now on, he could not remain silent. Anaxagoras put the tablets into a leather pouch hanging from his belt. He stood up, brushed the dust and ash from his chiton. Shadows still darted around him, but he no longer saw them. He looked westward, toward the horizon where Athens lay. The city that was just beginning to understand what true freedom of thought meant. And he would go to Athens. But before we journey with him, we will look to where it all began. To where, amid sea salt and ancient myths, in the city of Clazomenae, the mind of the man who dared to touch a star was formed. Before Anaxagoras could touch a fallen star, he first had to learn to see. And he learned to see in a place where the boundary between earth and sea dissolved into mist every morning. Clazomenae was not built on solid ground. It was built on fingers of land reaching into the Aegean, on small islands connected by narrow causeways, on docks and piers and artificial harbors. The city did not stand firmly on the earth. It floated, suspended between the element of water and the element of stone. Today, the ruins of Clazomenae lie near the modern Turkish town of Urla, not far from Izmir. But in the 5th century before our era, this was one of the most vibrant ports of Ionia, a place where the dust of caravans met the salt of the sea, where Persian satraps drank wine with Greek merchants, where the myths of the East mingled with the logic of the West. Young Anaxagoras grew up with the smell of brine in his nostrils and the cry of gulls in his ears. His family belonged to the aristocratic elite, the class that did not need to work with its hands but was expected to think with its mind. They owned land, ships, warehouses. They could have raised their son to be a merchant, a politician, a military commander. But the boy was different. He spent hours on the docks, not watching the cargo but watching the sky. He watched how the color of the sea changed with the position of the sun. He watched how waves formed and dissolved, how clouds gathered and dispersed. He asked questions that made the dockworkers laugh and the sailors shake their heads. Why does the sea taste of salt? Why do fish not drown? Why does the moon follow us when we walk? His family had a house on one of the islands, connected to the mainland by a stone causeway. At night, lying on the roof under the stars, young Anaxagoras could hear the water lapping against the stone on both sides. The city was never silent. It whispered constantly, with the voice of the tide. And in that whisper, the boy began to hear questions that no one else was asking. If water can wear away stone, if air can move ships, if fire can consume wood, then perhaps everything is made of something that can change into everything else. Perhaps the world is not a collection of separate things, but a single substance wearing different masks. This was the first seed of his philosophy. It would grow for decades before bearing fruit. But it was planted here, in the salt air of Clazomenae, in the mind of a boy who could not stop asking why. His father watched him with a mixture of pride and concern. Pride because the boy was clearly exceptional. Concern because exceptional children in dangerous times often came to bad ends. Ionia was not peaceful. The Persian Empire loomed to the east, always hungry, always watching. Greek cities fought each other over trade routes and fishing rights. The world was unstable, violent, unpredictable. But the boy seemed to live in another world. A world where the only real things were the questions. A world where the noise of politics and war faded into the background, and the only sound that mattered was the whisper of the tide asking, "What are you made of?" One day, when Anaxagoras was still young, he made a decision that shocked his family. He announced that he was giving away his inheritance. The land, the ships, the warehouses, let his relatives have them. He needed nothing. He needed only time to think. His relatives thought he had lost his mind. His father said nothing, but his eyes were sad. The boy who could have been a leader of men was choosing to be a wanderer in the realm of ideas. But Anaxagoras knew what he was doing. He understood that possessions possess the one who holds them. Every piece of land demands attention. Every ship requires care. Every coin asks to be counted. He wanted to be free. Free to follow the questions wherever they led. And they would lead him far. First to Miletus, where the great Anaximenes had taught that air was the source of all things. Then to the Ionian coast, where he would study the works of Thales and Anaximander. And finally, inevitably, to Athens. But before that journey began, there was a moment when the young philosopher stood on the causeway connecting his island to the mainland. Behind him lay his childhood, his family, his inheritance. Ahead lay the unknown. The sea whispered on both sides. And in that whisper, he heard the same question that would drive him for the rest of his life. What are you made of? He did not yet know the answer. But he knew that the question itself was worth more than all the gold in Persia. The young man stood before his family and spoke words that would echo through the centuries. He said, "I give it all away. The lands, the ships, the warehouses, everything my ancestors built. I need nothing. I need only time to think." His relatives stared at him as if he had lost his mind. Some laughed, others grew angry. One uncle grabbed him by the shoulder and shook him. "What will you eat? Where will you sleep? Who will take care of you when you are old?" Anaxagoras did not argue. He simply smiled and repeated, "I give it all away." In the days that followed, he walked through his fields one last time. The wheat was tall and golden, ready for harvest. This land had fed his family for generations. It could have fed him for a lifetime. But he knew that every hour spent managing it was an hour stolen from thinking. He walked past his vineyards, where the grapes hung heavy on the vines. He walked past his olive groves, where the silver leaves shimmered in the sun. And he felt no regret, only lightness, only freedom. When the harvest was over, he sold everything, not for profit, but for release. He turned the cultivated fields into pasture for sheep. Let the animals graze where philosophers once planned to grow old. Let the land return to its wild state, free from the demands of men. His neighbors shook their heads. They called him a fool, a dreamer, a man who had no sense of reality. But Anaxagoras knew something they did not. He knew that the only reality worth possessing was the one you could not lose. Why did he do it? Because he had understood something that few people ever grasp. Possessions do not belong to us. We belong to them. Every piece of land demands attention. Every ship requires care. Every coin asks to be counted. They are not tools. They are masters. Anaxagoras wanted to be free. Free from the endless cycle of acquisition and maintenance. Free from the anxiety of losing what he had. Free to follow his thoughts wherever they led, without looking back to see what he was leaving behind. But freedom is not cheap. His relatives stopped speaking to him. His friends thought he had gone mad. The women who had once smiled at him now looked away. He was alone, utterly, completely alone. And in that solitude, he found what he had been seeking. The silence that allowed him to hear his own thoughts. The stillness that let him see the patterns hidden beneath the surface of things. He began to read. Not for entertainment, not for distraction, but with the hunger of a starving man. He read the works of Thales, who had said that everything comes from water. He read the works of Anaximander, who had imagined the earth floating unsupported in space. And he read the works of Anaximenes, his countryman, who had taught that air was the source of all things. These were not just theories. They were maps. Maps of a territory he had barely begun to explore. He spent whole nights with those scrolls. Sometimes he would read the same passage dozens of times, trying to see what lay between the words. He was not looking for answers. He was looking for better questions. And slowly, imperceptibly, a new question began to form in his mind. If water, air, fire, earth, if all these are just different forms of the same underlying substance, then what is that substance? What is the one thing that lies beneath all things? He did not find the answer that night, or the next night, or the night after that, but he found something more important. He found that the search itself was worth more than all the answers he could ever hope to discover. The search, he realized, was what made him human. The questions, not the answers, were what connected him to Thales, to Anaximander, to everyone who had ever looked at the world and wondered why. One morning, he woke with a decision already formed in his mind. It was time to leave. Clazomenae had given him everything it could. The questions that remained could only be answered elsewhere. He packed a small bag, a few scrolls, a stylus, a change of clothes. Nothing more. He did not say goodbye to his family. They had already said goodbye to him. He walked through the city one last time, past the docks where he had asked his first questions, past the agora where his neighbors now avoided his gaze, past the houses of his relatives, their shutters closed against him. At the city gate, he paused and looked back. Behind him lay everything he had ever known. Ahead lay everything he had ever wondered about. He took a breath, and he walked forward, into the unknown, carrying nothing but questions. The road to Miletus stretched before him, and beyond Miletus, Athens, and beyond Athens, eternity. The road from Clazomenae to Miletus was not long. A few days' walk along the coast, past fishing villages and olive groves, past small harbors where merchant ships unloaded their cargo. But for Anaxagoras, it was a journey between worlds. He had left behind the city of his childhood, the family that no longer understood him, the inheritance he had given away. He carried nothing but a leather satchel with a few scrolls and the questions that burned in his mind. The road itself became his teacher. Each step took him closer to the source of the ideas that had shaped his thinking. Miletus was not just a city. It was the cradle of philosophy. Here, a century before Anaxagoras was born, Thales had asked the first question, what is the world made of? Here, Anaximander had drawn the first map of the known world and imagined the earth floating unsupported in space. And here, Anaximenes had taught that air was the fundamental substance from which all things arise. When Anaxagoras finally entered the city, he felt as if he were walking on sacred ground. The streets themselves seemed to whisper with the voices of the dead philosophers. He passed the harbor where Thales was said to have predicted a bumper harvest of olives and made a fortune. He walked through the agora where Anaximander had debated with his fellow citizens. He climbed the hill where Anaximenes had gazed at the sky and seen in it the same air that filled his lungs. But Anaximenes himself was gone. He had died decades before Anaxagoras was born. All that remained were his words, preserved on scrolls, copied and recopied by scribes who did not always understand what they were copying. Anaxagoras found a small room near the harbor, a place where he could sleep and read and think. He spent his days in the libraries, searching for every scrap of Anaximenes' teaching. He read that air was the source of all things. That air, when thinned, became fire. That air, when condensed, became wind, then cloud, then water, then earth, then stone. That the whole universe was simply air in different states of compression and rarefaction. It was beautiful in its simplicity. It explained everything with one principle. But something troubled Anaxagoras. If air could become everything, then everything was ultimately the same. A stone was just very condensed air. A cloud was just slightly expanded air. There was no real difference between things, only difference in degree. And yet, Anaxagoras could not escape the evidence of his senses. A stone was not like air. It was hard, cold, heavy. Air was invisible, weightless, everywhere. How could one be a version of the other? Was there not some irreducible difference between them? He walked the streets of Miletus at night, wrestling with this question. The stars above him were the same stars that Thales had studied, that Anaximander had mapped, that Anaximenes had explained as concentrations of air. Were they? Could they be? Or was there something wrong with the explanation? He thought about the meteorite at EURIPIDES. That stone had come from the sky. It was not made of condensed air. It was made of the same stuff as the earth. If the sky and the earth were made of the same substance, then Anaximenes was partly right. But if that substance was not air, then what was it? The question gnawed at him. He read the scrolls again, searching for clues. He found a passage where Anaximenes said that the soul itself was air. That just as air holds the universe together, so the soul holds the body together. That breath and spirit were the same word in Greek, pneuma. Anaxagoras sat with this thought for a long time. He breathed in and out, feeling the air fill his lungs and leave again. If air was the soul, then his own breath connected him to the cosmos. Every inhalation drew in a piece of the universe. Every exhalation returned it. But still, the meteorite haunted him. It had fallen from the sky, but it was solid, heavy, dense. If it was made of air, then air must be capable of becoming something utterly different from itself. And if air could become stone, then why not everything become everything else? This was the seed. It would take years to grow, but it was planted here, in Miletus, under the shadow of Anaximenes. Anaxagoras stayed in Miletus for many months. He read everything he could find. He talked with merchants and sailors who brought news from other cities. He listened to the debates in the agora, where men argued about politics and trade and the nature of the gods. But his mind kept returning to the same question: what is the world made of? The ship that carried Anaxagoras from Miletus cut through the Aegean under a sky heavy with clouds. He stood at the bow, watching the horizon, feeling the salt spray on his face. Behind him lay Ionia, the land of his ancestors, the birthplace of philosophy. Ahead lay Athens, a city he knew only from stories. The voyage took several days. He shared the deck with merchants returning from the eastern ports, with soldiers heading home from garrison duty, with a family relocating to the mainland. They spoke of cargo prices and political intrigues, of family disputes and the price of grain. Anaxagoras listened but did not join their conversations. He was already elsewhere, already thinking about the questions that had brought him here. At night, when the other passengers slept, he lay on the deck and gazed at the stars. They were the same stars he had seen from the rooftop in Clazomenae. They were the same stars that Thales had studied, that Anaximenes had explained. But now they seemed different. They were no longer distant objects of wonder. They were questions written in light. The ship passed islands whose names he knew from the poems of Homer: Lesbos, Chios, Samos. Each one a reminder of the world he was leaving behind. Each one a marker on the map of his journey. On the fifth day, the sailor in the crow's nest shouted, "Land ahead." Anaxagoras went to the bow and saw it for the first time. A dark mass on the horizon, growing slowly. The coast of Attica, the land of Athena. As the ship entered the harbor of Piraeus, Anaxagoras felt a strange mixture of excitement and dread. The port was crowded with vessels of every size. Warships with bronze ramps gleamed in the sun. Merchant ships from Egypt and Sicily unloaded their cargoes. The air was thick with the smell of fish, pitch, and the sweat of laborers. He stepped off the gangplank onto the stone quay. Around him, men shouted in accents he had never heard, haggling over prices, arguing about politics, cursing the gods. It was chaos, but it was a chaos that felt alive, electric, full of possibility. He had no money, no connections, no reputation. He was a stranger in a city that had no reason to welcome him. But he had something more valuable than gold. He had questions, and Athens, he had heard, was a place where questions were not forbidden. He walked through the narrow streets of Piraeus, past warehouses and taverns, past temples and workshops. He saw the long walls stretching toward Athens, massive fortifications that connected the port to the city. He saw the smoke rising from the potter's quarter, the gleam of marble in the distance. He did not know that this city would become his home for 3 decades, that he would teach its greatest leaders, inspire its greatest poets, and be driven from it in disgrace. He did not know that his ideas would spark a revolution in thought that would echo through the centuries. He only knew that he had arrived, that the journey was over, and that the real work was about to begin. He shouldered his satchel and began the long walk toward Athens. Athens in the middle of the 5th century before our era was not a beautiful city. It was a construction site. The Persians had burned the old temples on the Acropolis a generation earlier, and the Athenians were still rebuilding. Scaffolding covered the slopes of the sacred hill. Marble blocks lay everywhere, waiting to become columns, waiting to become gods. Anaxagoras walked through this chaos with the calm of a man who had learned to see order beneath disorder. The dust of construction coated his himation, but he did not notice. He was looking at the people. Athenians were different from Ionians. They moved faster, spoke louder, argued more fiercely. In the agora, he heard debates about everything: the war with Sparta, the rights of citizens, the nature of justice. Men shouted at each other, gesticulated, quoted laws and poets. It was exhausting. It was exhilarating. He found a small room in the house of a potter near the Kerameikos. The potter was skeptical of this stranger who paid his rent on time, but spent all his time reading scrolls and staring at the sky. But the potter's wife, a sharp-eyed woman from Ionia herself, recognized something familiar in him. She convinced her husband to let him stay. Anaxagoras began to attend the gatherings of the intellectuals who met in the agora. He listened to the sophists who taught rhetoric for money. He listened to the politicians who tried to persuade the assembly. He listened to the poets who recited verses in the theaters. He said nothing. He just listened. One afternoon, he found himself in a crowd gathered around a man who claimed to know the secrets of the stars. The man was a fraud. Anaxagoras could see that immediately. He spoke of omens and prophecies, of gods who controlled the heavens. The crowd listened with rapt attention, nodding at every nonsense syllable. Anaxagoras could not contain himself. He stepped forward and began to speak. He explained that the stars were not gods, but fiery stones. He explained that the moon shone with reflected light. He explained that eclipses were not signs of divine anger, but natural phenomena that could be predicted. The crowd stared at him. Some laughed. Others grew angry. One man picked up a stone. But a young man in the front row, a youth with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, stepped between Anaxagoras and the crowd. "Let him speak," the youth said. "I want to hear more." That youth was Pericles. They walked away from the agora together, Pericles asking questions, Anaxagoras answering. They talked until the sun set and the stars came out. And when Anaxagoras pointed to those stars and explained their nature, Pericles listened with the same rapt attention the crowd had given the fraud. But now the attention was earned. "You have opened my eyes," Pericles said. "You have shown me that the world is not a mystery to be feared, but a puzzle to be solved." Anaxagoras smiled. "That is the only lesson I have to teach," he said. "Everything else is just details." Pericles was not yet the ruler of Athens. He was young, ambitious, and hungry for knowledge. But he already carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew he was destined for greatness. The Athenians called him Olympian, not because he was aloof, but because he seemed to move on a higher plane than ordinary men. He sought out Anaxagoras constantly. They met in the agora, in the gymnasium, in the quiet courtyards of Pericles' family home. Pericles asked questions about everything: the nature of the gods, the origin of the universe, the purpose of human life. Anaxagoras answered with patience, with clarity, with the same calm he had shown at Egospotami. You could be a leader of men, Pericles said one day. With your mind, you could rule Athens. Anaxagoras shook his head. I have no desire to rule, he said. I desire only to understand. You are the one who will lead. I am the one who will teach. Pericles accepted this. He began to bring his friends to Anaxagoras' lectures. Young aristocrats, ambitious politicians, artists seeking new ideas. They came out of curiosity and stayed because they sensed that this stranger from Ionia possessed something rare. Not just knowledge, but a way of thinking that made everything else seem shallow. Anaxagoras taught them to look beyond appearances. He taught them that the world was not as it seemed, that behind every object lay a structure, a pattern, a principle. That reason, not tradition, was the key to understanding. Not everyone was pleased. The old families of Athens, the conservatives who had ruled for generations, watched this new influence with suspicion. Anaxagoras was a foreigner. He had no citizenship, no rights, no stake in the city. Yet he was shaping the minds of its future leaders. One evening, after a particularly crowded lecture, a delegation of elders confronted Pericles. They warned him against this Ionian who spoke of stones falling from the sky and moons without gods. They reminded him of the fate of those who angered the gods. Pericles listened politely, then dismissed them with a smile. I have learned more from Anaxagoras in 1 month than from all the priests in a lifetime, he said. If the gods are angry, let them strike me now. Nothing happened. The elders shuffled away, muttering. Pericles laughed and went back to his teacher. But Anaxagoras did not laugh. He had seen this before. He knew that the elders would not forget. They would wait. They would watch. They would find their moment. In Ionia, he had left behind his family and his inheritance. In Athens, he might have to leave behind something more precious, his freedom. He said nothing to Pericles. He simply continued to teach, to think, to question. Whatever came, he was ready. The lectures grew. What began as private conversations in Pericles' courtyard became public gatherings in the open spaces of Athens. Anaxagoras did not seek this. He would have been content with a few attentive students. But word spread, and the curious came. They came from all walks of life. Wealthy aristocrats who wanted to impress their friends with clever talk. Young men seeking purpose in a world that seemed to have lost its gods. Old men who had spent their lives accumulating wealth and now wondered if they had missed something essential. Even a few women, veiled and silent at the back of the crowd, drawn by rumors of a man who spoke of things no one else dared to mention. Anaxagoras taught without notes, without prepared speeches. He spoke as the thoughts came to him, building arguments step by step, inviting questions, encouraging doubt. He did not want followers. He wanted thinkers. One day, a young man asked him, "What is the soul?" Anaxagoras paused. He looked at the sky, then at the ground, then back at the young man. "The soul," he said, "is what makes the difference between a living body and a corpse. It is the principle of movement, of perception, of thought. But what it is made of, I do not know. Perhaps it is made of the same stuff as the stars. Perhaps it is made of something else entirely." Another student asked, "If the sun is a stone, why does it give light?" Anaxagoras smiled. "A stone can be hot," he said. "A stone can glow. Have you never seen a blacksmith's forge? The fire makes the metal white. The sun is like that, but the fire is inside it." The questions never stopped. Why does the moon change shape? Because it is a solid body, and the light from the sun illuminates only part of it. Why do eclipses happen? Because the moon passes between us and the sun, or the earth between the sun and the moon. Why does the sea taste of salt? Because the rivers carry minerals from the land and deposit them in the sea. Each answer led to more questions. That was the point. Anaxagoras did not want his students to accept his answers. He wanted them to learn how to ask better questions. One afternoon, after a particularly intense session, a young man approached him. He was not like the others. He had a restless energy, a hunger that went beyond curiosity. His name was Euripides. "I want to write plays," he said, "but not like the old ones. I want to write about real people, not gods. I want to write about suffering and doubt and the cruelty of fate. Anaxagoras looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "You have understood. The gods are excuses. We make them to explain what we cannot explain. But the real drama is here, on earth, in the hearts of men and women." Euripides nodded. He would remember those words for the rest of his life. Euripides came to Anaxagoras not as a student seeking knowledge, but as a poet seeking truth. He had grown up in the shadow of Aeschylus and Sophocles, the giants of Athenian drama. Their plays were filled with gods and heroes, with grand themes and noble speeches. Euripides wanted something different. He wanted to show life as it really was: messy, painful, absurd. Anaxagoras became his secret teacher. They met in private, away from the crowds, away from the eyes of the city. Euripides would read his latest lines, and Anaxagoras would listen. Then he would ask questions. Why does this character suffer? What does she believe about the gods? Is that belief true? Euripides began to see that the old myths were not just stories. They were lies. Lies that justified cruelty, that explained away suffering, that made people accept their fate instead of fighting it. He began to write plays that questioned everything. In Medea, he showed a woman driven to murder by her husband's betrayal. In Hippolytus, he showed a man destroyed by a goddess's spite. In the Trojan Women, he showed the horrors of war, the suffering of the innocent, the silence of the gods. The audiences were shocked. They had never seen anything like it. Some walked out. Others shouted insults. But some stayed, and they began to think. Anaxagoras watched from the shadows, proud of his student. He knew that Euripides was doing something more important than writing plays. He was changing the way people saw the world. One evening, after a performance that had been booed by the crowd, Euripides came to Anaxagoras in despair. "They hate me," he said. "They think I am mocking the gods." Anaxagoras put a hand on his shoulder. "Let them hate," he said. "They hated Socrates, too. They will hate anyone who tells them the truth." "But what is truth?" Euripides asked. "If the gods are not real, if the myths are lies, then what is left? Only suffering, only pain." Anaxagoras smiled. "No," he said. "What is left is us, human beings, with our minds and our hearts, our capacity to love and to suffer, to create and to destroy. That is enough. That is everything." Euripides looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. He went back to his writing. And the plays grew darker, more honest, more painful. The city would never forgive him for it. But he did not write for the city. He wrote for truth. She came from Miletus, like the philosophers before her. But Aspasia was not a philosopher. She was a woman, and in Athens, women did not attend lectures, did not engage in debates, did not speak in public. They stayed in the shadows, managed the household, bore children, and kept silent. Aspasia kept silence for no one. She arrived in Athens as a young woman, already sharp-tongued and quick-witted. She had learned rhetoric from the sophists in Ionia, and she used it like a weapon. Soon she became the companion of Pericles, his lover, his advisor, his equal. The conservatives hated her. They called her a whore, a foreigner, a bad influence. They whispered that she controlled Pericles, that she corrupted him, that she was responsible for every unpopular decision he made. Pericles did not care. He brought her to the gatherings of his friends, to the symposia where men discussed philosophy and politics. At first, the men were uncomfortable. A woman in their midst, and such a woman. But Aspasia spoke, and they listened. She had a way of cutting through nonsense, of finding the weak point in any argument, of saying more in a few words than most men could in hours. Anaxagoras met her at one of these gatherings. He watched her dismantle a sophist who had been boasting about his skills. The sophist left red-faced, humiliated. Anaxagoras laughed. "You are wasted on politicians," he said to her. "You should be teaching philosophy." Aspasia smiled. "I am teaching philosophy," she said. "I am teaching them that a woman can think." They became friends, Anaxagoras and Aspasia. They met often, sometimes with Pericles, sometimes alone. She challenged him, questioned him, pushed him to clarify his ideas. He had never met anyone like her. "Do you think the soul is immortal?" she asked him one day. "I do not know," he said. "I know that it exists. I know that it is the principle of life and thought. But what happens after death, I cannot say. And if it is not immortal," she said, "then what is the point of virtue? Why be good if there is no reward?" Anaxagoras thought for a moment. "Because virtue is its own reward," he said. Because to be good is to live in accordance with reason. Because a life without virtue is a life without meaning, whether it lasts a day or a century. Aspasia nodded. That is what I try to teach them, she said. That meaning comes from within, not from the gods. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set over the city. Then Aspasia spoke again. They will destroy you, you know. The same people who hate me, who hate Pericles. They will find a way to silence you. Anaxagoras shrugged. Let them try. They can silence my voice, but they cannot silence the questions. The questions will outlive us all. The question had been with him since Clazomenae, since the meteorite, since the first time he had looked at the world and wondered what it was made of. Now, in Athens, surrounded by students and friends and enemies, he finally began to formulate an answer. It came to him not in a flash of inspiration, but slowly, over years of thinking and reading and discussing. It came from ANAXIMENES, who had taught that air could become everything. It came from the meteorite, which had shown him that the sky and the earth were made of the same stuff. It came from the questions of his students, who kept asking, if everything is one thing, how can things be different? The answer was simple, and it was devastating. Everything contains everything. He explained it to his students one afternoon. Imagine a piece of bread, he said. You eat it. It becomes flesh, bone, blood. How? Where does the flesh come from? It was not in the bread. Or was it? The students looked confused. The bread contains everything, he said. It contains particles of flesh, particles of bone, particles of blood. They are too small to see, too small to taste. But they are there. When you eat the bread, your body separates them, rearranges them, uses them to build itself. But then, a student objected, if everything contains everything, then a stone contains flesh? A cloud contains bone? Anaxagoras nodded. In a way, yes. Everything contains seeds of every other thing. But the proportions differ. In a stone, the seeds of stone dominate. In flesh, the seeds of flesh dominate. That is what makes things different. He called them seeds. Later philosophers would call them homoiameres, things with similar parts. But the idea was the same. The universe was not made of a few basic elements. It was made of an infinite variety of tiny particles, each containing the potential for everything else. This explained change. Things changed because the seeds within them rearranged themselves. It explained growth. Living things grew because they absorbed seeds from their food. It explained the meteorite. The sky was not made of a different substance. It was made of the same seeds as the earth, arranged differently. One of his students asked, what holds it all together? What keeps the seeds from flying apart? Anaxagoras had an answer for that too. Nous, he said, mind, an infinite, all-powerful mind that set the universe in motion, that ordered the seeds, that created the cosmos from chaos. But this mind was not a god. It did not answer prayers. It did not care about human affairs. It was simply the principle of order, the force that made the universe intelligible. A student asked, does this mind have a purpose? Does it have a plan? Anaxagoras shook his head. I do not know, he said. Perhaps it does. Perhaps it does not. All I know is that without mind, there would be only chaos. With mind, there is order. And order is what we can understand. Mind. Nous. The word was simple, but the concept was vast. Anaxagoras spent years refining his understanding of it, and still he felt he had only scratched the surface. He explained it to his students again and again, using different images, different analogies. Imagine a potter, he would say. The clay is everything, the seeds. The potter's hands are nous. They shape the clay, give it form, create something new. But the potter is not in the clay. The potter is separate, pure, unmixed. Or imagine a whirlwind, he would say. The wind picks up dust and leaves and swirls them together. That is the original chaos. Then something happens. The wind calms. Order emerges. That something is nous. The students struggled. They were used to gods who acted like humans, who loved and hated, who intervened in battles and seduced mortal women. Nous was different. Nous did not love. Nous did not hate. Nous did not care. Nous simply ordered. One student asked, does Nous know us? Does it see us? Anaxagoras paused. I do not know, he said. Perhaps it does. Perhaps it is aware of everything, everywhere, all at once. But if it is, it does not act on that awareness. It does not answer prayers. It does not punish sins. It simply orders. Then what is the point of worship? The student asked. Anaxagoras smiled. Worship is for you, not for Nous. It reminds you of the order of the universe. It helps you align your mind with the mind that orders all things. He wrote these ideas down, carefully, precisely. He wanted to leave a record for future generations, a map of the territory he had explored. He called his book on nature, like so many others before him. But his was different. In it, he described the original state of the universe. All things together, infinite in number, infinitesimally small. A chaos of seeds, mixed and blended, with nothing separate, nothing distinct. Then Nous acted. It set the mixture in motion, a spinning, whirling motion that began to separate the seeds. The denser seeds moved toward the center. The lighter seeds moved outward. Stars formed from the fiery seeds. Earth formed from the dense seeds. Water, air, everything found its place. But the separation was never complete. Everything still contained seeds of every other thing. That was why change was possible. That was why a stone could become dust, and dust could become soil, and soil could nourish a plant, and a plant could feed an animal, and an animal could become a man. Everything contains everything. And Nous is the reason. He showed the book to Pericles, who read it with fascination. This will change everything, Pericles said. This will change how people think. Anaxagoras shook his head. It will change how a few people think, he said. The rest will go on as before. They will worship their gods and fear the dark and never ask why. But that is enough, Pericles said. A few people. That is how change begins. In the beginning, there was chaos. Not the chaos of myth, with monsters and gaping voids. A different kind of chaos. A chaos of seeds. Everything that would ever exist was there, compressed into an infinitely small space, mixed and blended beyond recognition. Then Nous acted. It did not create the seeds. They had always been there, eternal, indestructible. What Nous did was set them in motion. A rotation, a spinning, a cosmic whirl that began to separate the dense from the light, the heavy from the subtle. Anaxagoras described it to his students with his hands, making circular motions in the air. Imagine a great vortex, he said, like a whirlpool in the sea, but vaster, encompassing everything. The heavy seeds are drawn to the center. They form the earth. The lighter seeds are flung outward. They become the stars. The students tried to imagine it. A whirlpool that created worlds. A spin that ordered the universe. What about the sun? One asked. The sun, Anaxagoras said, is a concentration of fiery seeds. It is a stone, but a stone so hot that it glows. It was caught in the vortex, flung outward but not too far. It circles the earth, giving light and warmth. And the moon? The moon is also a stone, he said, but it is colder, denser. It does not glow on its own. It reflects the light of the sun. The students were silent, trying to absorb this. They had grown up with stories of Helios driving his chariot across the sky, of Selene riding her silver crescent. Now they were being told that the sun and moon were stones. It was unsettling. It was exhilarating. One student raised his hand. If the sun is a stone, he asked, how does it stay in the sky? Why doesn't it fall? Anaxagoras smiled. Why does any stone fall? He asked. Because it is heavy. Because it seeks the center. The sun does not fall because it is caught in the vortex, spinning so fast that it cannot fall. Like water in a whirlpool, held in place by the motion. Another student. And the stars? Are they also stones? Yes, Anaxagoras said. But they are farther away, smaller. They are caught in the same vortex, circling at the edge of the cosmos. The students looked at each other. It was a lot to take in. A universe made of stones and seeds, and a great cosmic whirl. No gods, no chariots, no divine interventions. Just matter and motion and mind. One student, the boldest, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. If the universe is just matter and motion, he said, then what is the point? Why are we here? Anaxagoras looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, perhaps we are here to ask that question. Perhaps that is the point. Of all the things Anaxagoras taught, nothing provoked more outrage than his explanation of the sun. The sun, he said, is not a god. It is not Helios driving his chariot across the sky. It is a stone. A molten stone, white-hot, larger than the Peloponnese. The first time he said this in public, the crowd gasped. Some laughed. Others grew angry. An old man shook his fist and shouted blasphemy. A woman covered her children's ears. Anaxagoras stood calmly, waiting for the noise to subside. He had expected this. He had seen it before, in Ionia, in Miletus, in every place where he had tried to replace myth with reason. When the crowd finally quieted, he spoke again. "I do not say this to offend you," he said. "I say it because it is true. The sun is a stone. We know this because stones fall from the sky. The meteorite at Egospotami was a stone. It came from the heavens. It proved that the heavens are made of the same stuff as the earth. But if the sun is a stone," someone shouted, "why does it give light?" "Because it is hot," Anaxagoras said. "Have you never seen a blacksmith's forge? The metal becomes white with heat. The sun is like that, but on a vastly larger scale." The crowd was not convinced. They had been told since childhood that the sun was a god. Their parents had taught them to pray to Helios. Their priests had built temples to him. Now this stranger from Ionia was telling them that their god was a rock. Anaxagoras did not expect them to accept it immediately. He knew that ideas take time, that truth spreads slowly, that most people prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable facts. He was patient, but the authorities were not patient. Word of his teachings reached the ears of those who saw themselves as defenders of tradition. They began to whisper. They began to plot. One evening, after a particularly crowded lecture, a delegation of priests confronted him. "You are corrupting the youth," they said. "You are undermining the foundations of our city." Anaxagoras looked at them with calm, steady eyes. "I am only telling them what I have seen," he said. "I am only telling them what I have reasoned. If that corrupts them, then perhaps they need to be corrupted." The priests were speechless. They had never encountered such defiance. They left, muttering threats. Anaxagoras watched them go. He knew that this was only the beginning. They would come back. They would bring others. They would find a way to silence him. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight, the stars still shone, and the questions still burned. If the sun was a stone, what was the moon? Anaxagoras had an answer for that too. "The moon," he said, "is another stone. But it is colder, denser. It does not glow on its own. It reflects the light of the sun." This was not entirely original. Others had suggested it before him. But Anaxagoras went further. He claimed that the moon had mountains and valleys, just like the earth. He claimed that it was a world, a place, a landscape. The students were fascinated. How could he know this? They asked. How could he see mountains on the moon? Anaxagoras explained. "Look at the moon when it is not full," he said. "See the dark patches, the lighter patches. The dark patches are shadows. Shadows cast by mountains. The light patches are the mountains themselves, catching the sun's rays." The students looked. They had never thought about it before. The moon was just the moon, a disk in the sky. But now, with Anaxagoras's words in their minds, they began to see it differently. They began to see a world. One student asked, "If the moon has mountains, does it have inhabitants? Does it have life?" Anaxagoras smiled. "I do not know," he said. "Perhaps it does. Perhaps it is inhabited by beings we cannot imagine. But if so, they are not gods. They are creatures, like us, made of the same seeds, living under the same laws." The idea was intoxicating. A universe filled with worlds, each with its own mountains and valleys, its own creatures, its own mysteries. It made the cosmos seem larger, richer, more wonderful than the old myths had ever suggested. But it also made it more frightening. If the moon was a world, then the sky was not a dome. It was an infinite expanse, stretching in all directions, filled with countless worlds. And we were just one of them, small and insignificant. Some students found this disturbing. They preferred the old stories, the cozy universe where the gods watched over them, and the stars were just lights. Anaxagoras's universe was cold, vast, and different. Anaxagoras did not try to comfort them. He did not offer reassurances. He simply presented the evidence and let them draw their own conclusions. One evening, after a long discussion, a student approached him. "I am afraid," he said, "afraid of the vastness, afraid of being so small." Anaxagoras put a hand on his shoulder. "The vastness is not something to fear," he said. "It is something to wonder at. We are small, yes, but we are also part of it. The same seeds that make the stars make us. The same mind that orders the cosmos orders our thoughts. We are not separate. We are part of the whole." The student nodded slowly. He was not entirely convinced, but he was comforted, and that was enough. The sky growled. Lightning split the darkness. Rain lashed the rooftops of Athens. Inside his small room, Anaxagoras watched the storm with calm, analytical eyes. While others hid in fear, he observed. He had been studying storms for years. He had watched them from the coast of Ionia, from the hills of Miletus, now from the heart of Athens. He had noted their patterns, their rhythms, their effects. And he had come to a conclusion. The thunder was not the voice of Zeus. The lightning was not his weapon. They were natural phenomena, caused by the collision of clouds, the friction of air, the release of pent-up force. He explained it to his students the next day. When clouds collide, he said, they create a sound. That sound is thunder. When the friction generates heat, that heat is lightning. There is no God throwing bolts from Olympus. There is only physics. The students were skeptical. They had grown up with stories of Zeus punishing the wicked, of Athena guiding heroes, of Poseidon stirring the seas. To let go of those stories was to let go of a part of themselves. But Anaxagoras was patient. He did not mock their beliefs. He simply presented the evidence and let them think. One student asked, if the gods do not control the weather, what do they control? Anaxagoras shrugged. Perhaps nothing, he said. Perhaps the gods are just stories we tell ourselves to make sense of the world. But the world makes sense on its own. We just have to look. The idea that the gods might be stories was more disturbing than anything else he had said. It struck at the heart of Athenian identity. The city was named after Athena. Its most sacred festival, the Panathenea, celebrated her birth. Its greatest building, the Parthenon, was her temple. If Athena was just a story, what was Athens? Anaxagoras did not answer this question directly. He did not need to. The question itself was enough. But others answered. The conservatives, the traditionalists, the priests. They saw where his ideas were leading. They saw that if the gods were stories, then the old order was built on sand. And they decided to act. They began to gather evidence. They listened to his lectures, took notes, quoted him out of context. They built a case for impiety, a case for blasphemy, a case for destroying the man who was destroying their world. Anaxagoras knew what was happening. He could feel the net tightening. But he did not stop teaching. He did not stop questioning. He did not stop looking at the world with calm, analytical eyes. If they want to silence me, he said to Pericles, let them try. But they cannot silence the truth. The truth will outlive us all. Pericles looked at him with concern. They will not stop with you, he said. They will come for me next. They will come for all of us. Then we will face them together, Anaxagoras said. As we always have. If the universe was ordered by mind, what about human beings? Were we also products of Nous? Anaxagoras believed so. But his view of human nature was both exalted and humbling. He taught that humans were the most intelligent of animals because they had hands. This was a radical idea. Most Greeks believed that humans were superior because the gods had made them so. Anaxagoras reversed the logic. It was not mind that gave us hands. It was hands that gave us mind. Think about it, he said to his students. A creature with hands can grasp, manipulate, create. It can build tools, shape materials, change its environment. Over time, this constant interaction with the world develops intelligence. The hands teach the mind. The students were puzzled. They had always thought of mind as something given by the gods, a divine spark that set humans apart. Anaxagoras was telling them that it was the result of evolution, of adaptation, of chance. But if that is true, one student objected, then what makes us different from animals? Are we just clever beasts? Anaxagoras nodded. In a way, yes. We are part of the same continuum. The same seeds that make the stars make us. The same nous that orders the cosmos orders our thoughts. But we have something they do not. We have self-awareness. We can reflect on our own existence. We can ask why. This idea, that humans were not special creations but part of a larger whole, was both liberating and terrifying. It meant that we were not the center of the universe. It meant that our fate was not guided by divine providence. It meant that we were alone, responsible for ourselves. But it also meant that we were connected. Connected to the stars, to the earth, to every living thing. The same seeds that made us made everything else. We were not separate. We were part of the great cosmic dance. One student asked, if we are just matter and mind, what happens when we die? Anaxagoras paused. He had thought about this many times. The seeds that make us, he said, do not die. They disperse. They return to the universe. The nous that ordered us? That is harder. Perhaps it returns to the great Nous. Perhaps it simply ceases. I do not know. The student looked troubled. So there is no afterlife? No reward for the virtuous? No punishment for the wicked? Anaxagoras shook his head. Not that I can see. Virtue must be its own reward. We must be good because it is good to be good, not because we expect a prize. The student was silent for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. I think I understand, he said. It is harder, but it is also more honest. Anaxagoras smiled. Yes, he said. Honesty is always harder, but it is the only path worth taking. The enemies of Pericles had been waiting for years. They had watched him rise, gathering power, gathering allies, gathering the love of the people. They had watched him transform Athens, building the Parthenon, strengthening the navy, extending the empire. They had watched and they had waited. Now they saw their chance. Pericles was vulnerable. His friends were his weakness, and his most vulnerable friend was Anaxagoras. The strategy was simple. Attack the teacher to wound the student. Bring charges against Anaxagoras for impiety. Use his teachings as evidence that Pericles was surrounded by godless men. Implicate Pericles in the crime. The leader of the plot was a man named DIOPEITHES. He was a seer, a prophet, a man who made his living from fear. He had watched with alarm as Anaxagoras explained away eclipses and thunderstorms, robbing him of his clients, his income, his power. Now he struck back. He proposed a decree, a law against those who did not believe in the gods, who taught about the heavens, who explained away divine signs. It was aimed directly at Anaxagoras. Everyone knew it. The assembly debated. Pericles spoke against it, but his voice was not enough. The decree passed. Anaxagoras was now a criminal. Pericles came to Anaxagoras with the news. You must leave, he said. They will arrest you. They will try you. They will kill you. Anaxagoras looked at him calmly. I have known this day would come, he said. I have been expecting it for years. You cannot just accept it, Pericles said. You must fight. I will defend you. I will use all my power. Anaxagoras shook his head. Your power is not infinite, he said. If you defend me, they will attack you. They will use me to destroy you. I will not let that happen. Pericles was silent. He knew that Anaxagoras was right. The enemies were not just after the philosopher. They were after him. The teacher was a symbol, a weapon, a way to wound the leader. What will you do? Pericles asked. Anaxagoras smiled. I will go into exile, he said. It is not so bad. I have been in exile before. I left Ionia. I left Miletus. I can leave Athens. The questions go with me. The seeds go with me. Nous goes with me. Pericles looked at him with sorrow. I will miss you, he said. And I you, Anaxagoras replied. But this is not the end. It is only a change of scene. Not long after the decree was passed, an event occurred that seemed to confirm the fears of the superstitious and the hopes of the scheming. A farmer brought a ram to the city. It was an ordinary ram in every way except one. It had a single horn growing from the center of its forehead. The crowd gathered, gasping, pointing. It was a sign, they said. A portent. The gods were speaking. The seers were called. They examined the ram, consulted their charts, pronounced their verdict. The single horn meant that Pericles would triumph over his enemies. It was a message of hope, a divine endorsement. Pericles himself was uncertain. He did not trust seers, but he did not want to offend the people by dismissing their beliefs. Then Anaxagoras stepped forward. He had heard the commotion and come to see. He examined the ram carefully, running his hands over its skull. Then he spoke. This is not a sign from the gods, he said. It is a natural deformity. The skull is malformed. The horn grows where two should grow, fused together. It is interesting, but it is not divine. The crowd was silent. Then a murmur began. Some were angry. Others were curious. A few were convinced. The seers were furious. They had been publicly humiliated. Their authority, already weakened by Anaxagoras' teachings, was now in tatters. Pericles looked at Anaxagoras with admiration. You have courage, he said. You have just made enemies of every seer in Athens. Anaxagoras shrugged. They were already my enemies, he said. Now they have a better reason to hate me. The incident did not change the course of events. The enemies of Pericles continued their plotting. The decree remained in force. Anaxagoras knew that his time in Athens was running out. But the story of the ram spread. It became a symbol of the conflict between reason and superstition, between science and tradition. People talked about it in the agora, in the workshops, in the homes. Some laughed at the seers. Others shook their heads at the arrogance of the philosopher. Anaxagoras did not care what they thought. He had spoken the truth. That was enough. One evening, as he was packing his few belongings, a knock came at his door. It was a young man, a student he had not seen before. "I want to thank you," the young man said, "for the ram, for showing us that we do not have to be afraid." Anaxagoras looked at him. "You are welcome," he said. "But remember, the truth is not always comforting. It is not always easy. It is just true." The young man nodded. "I understand," he said. "I will try to live by that." He left. Anaxagoras returned to his packing. Outside, the city hummed with its endless noise. Soon, he would leave it behind. DIOPEITHES was not a philosopher. He was not a politician. He was a businessman. His business was fear. He sold prophecies. He interpreted omens. He told people what the gods wanted, what they should do to avoid disaster, how they could gain favor. His income depended on people believing that the world was controlled by invisible forces that could be appeased. Anaxagoras threatened that business. Every time he explained an eclipse, a thunderstorm, a meteorite, he took a little piece of DIOPEITHES' income. Every time a student stopped consulting seers and started observing nature, DIOPEITHES lost a customer. So DIOPEITHES struck back. He drafted a law against those who did not believe in the gods, who taught about the heavens, who explained away divine signs. It was carefully worded to sound patriotic, protective, pious. But everyone knew who it was aimed at. He brought it before the assembly. He spoke of the danger of impiety, of the anger of the gods, of the need to protect Athenian traditions. He did not mention Anaxagoras by name. He did not need to. The assembly debated. Pericles spoke against it, but his voice was weakened by political maneuvering. His enemies had been working for years to undermine him. Now they had their chance. The law passed. Anaxagoras was now a criminal. Anaxagoras received the news calmly. He had been expecting it. He had seen the net tightening, the whispers growing louder, the faces of his students growing more anxious. Pericles came to him that night. "You must leave at once," he said. "They will arrest you in the morning. They will put you on trial. They will kill you." Anaxagoras nodded. "I know," he said. "I have been preparing." He had already packed his few belongings. A few scrolls, a change of clothes, a stylus. Nothing more. He was ready. Pericles looked at him with anguish. "I should have been able to protect you," he said. "I am the most powerful man in Athens, and I could not protect my own teacher." Anaxagoras smiled. "You are not the most powerful man in Athens," he said. "You are the most powerful man in a city of men. But there are forces greater than you. Fear is greater than you. Superstition is greater than you. You cannot fight them alone." Pericles was silent. He knew it was true. "Where will you go?" he asked. Anaxagoras looked toward the east. "LAMPSACUS," he said, "a city on the Hellespont. It is under Persian protection. They will not dare touch me there." Pericles nodded. It was a good choice. Far from Athens, far from the reach of DIOPEITHES and his laws. "I will come to visit you," Pericles said, "when this is over." Anaxagoras shook his head. "You will not," he said, "and that is as it should be. Your place is here. Mine is elsewhere. We have given each other what we could. That is enough." In the final days before his departure, a young man came to see Anaxagoras. He was not like the others. He had no interest in politics or poetry. He had no desire for wealth or fame. He wanted only one thing, to understand. His name was Socrates. He was young then, barely more than a boy. His face was plain, his body stocky, his clothes worn. But his eyes burned with a fire that Anaxagoras recognized immediately. It was the same fire that had driven him from Clazomenae, from Miletus, across the sea to Athens. "I have heard you speak," Socrates said. "I have heard you explain the sun and the moon, the stars and the storms. I have heard you say that the universe is ordered by mind. I want to know more." Anaxagoras looked at him with interest. "What do you want to know?" he asked. "Everything," Socrates said. "I want to know why. Not just how things work. Why they exist at all. Why we exist." Anaxagoras smiled. "That is the right question," he said. "That is the question that has driven me my whole life. I can tell you what I have discovered, but I cannot give you the answer you seek. No one can." They talked for hours, through the afternoon and into the evening. Anaxagoras explained his theories, his methods, his doubts. Socrates listened, asked questions, pushed back. It was the kind of conversation Anaxagoras had always dreamed of. As the sun set, Socrates grew quiet. Finally, he spoke. "I am disappointed," he said. Anaxagoras raised an eyebrow. "Disappointed? Why?" "Because you have explained how the world works," Socrates said. "You have shown me the mechanics of the cosmos. But you have not told me why. Why is the world ordered this way? Why is there order at all? Why is there something rather than nothing?" Anaxagoras was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "You are right," he said. "I have not answered that question. I do not know if it can be answered. Perhaps the universe simply is. Perhaps there is no why." Socrates shook his head. "There must be," he said. "There must be a purpose. Otherwise, everything is meaningless." Anaxagoras looked at him with something like pity. "Perhaps meaning is not something we find," he said. "Perhaps it is something we create. Perhaps that is the work of a lifetime." Socrates pondered this. Then he stood. "I will remember you," he said. "I will remember that you asked the questions, even if you did not find all the answers." Anaxagoras nodded. "That is all any of us can do," he said. "Ask the questions. Keep asking. Never stop." Socrates left. Anaxagoras watched him go, knowing that he had just met one of the few who would carry the flame after him. On the morning of his departure, Anaxagoras stood on the deck of a small ship bound for LAMPSACUS. The sun was just rising over the Aegean, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. He looked back at the city he had called home for 30 years. Athens glittered in the morning light. The Parthenon, still under construction, gleamed on the Acropolis. The long walls stretched toward the sea, symbols of Athenian power. It was beautiful. It was heartbreaking. As he watched, something strange happened. The light began to fade. The sun, which had been rising so brightly, started to dim. A shadow crept across its face. An eclipse. The sailors on the ship cried out in fear. Some fell to their knees, praying to the gods. Others covered their eyes, unable to look. Anaxagoras stood calmly, watching. He had explained this phenomenon countless times. The moon passing between the earth and the sun. Nothing supernatural. Nothing divine. Just the dance of stones in the sky. He thought of Pericles. He thought of the lesson on the boat, when Pericles had calmed a frightened sailor by covering his eyes with his cloak. "The eclipse is just a shadow," he had said. "Nothing to fear." Now, as the sun darkened over the departing ship, Anaxagoras felt a strange sense of peace. The universe was following its laws. The seeds were doing what seeds do. Nous was ordering all things. The darkness lasted only a few minutes. Then the light returned, as bright as before. The sailors slowly rose from their knees, looking at each other with wonder. The world had not ended. The gods had not struck them down. Anaxagoras smiled. He had seen this before. He would see it again. The universe was reliable, predictable, understandable. That was its beauty. As the ship sailed east, he thought about the questions that had driven him all his life. The questions about matter and mind, about the stars and the soul, about the nature of existence itself. He had not answered all of them. No one could, but he had asked them. He had kept asking. That was enough. He thought about his students. Pericles, who would lead Athens through its greatest years. EURIPIDES, who would change the way people saw the world. Socrates, who would carry the flame of questioning into the next generation. They were his legacy, more than any book or theory. The sun climbed higher in the sky. The coast of Attica receded into the distance. Anaxagoras stood at the bow, facing east, toward his new life. He was an exile. He was a criminal. He was a man without a city. But he was also free. Free to think. Free to question. Free to seek the truth wherever it might lead. That was all he had ever wanted. The journey took several days. The ship hugged the coast, stopping at small ports to take on water and supplies. Anaxagoras watched the shoreline pass, each familiar landmark a reminder of what he was leaving behind. When the ship finally entered the harbor of Lampsacus, he felt a strange sense of relief. The city was small, quiet, nothing like Athens. It was a place where he could disappear, where no one would care about his theories or his trials. But he was wrong. Word of his arrival had spread. As he stepped off the gangplank, a crowd was waiting. Not an angry crowd, not a curious crowd. A welcoming crowd. The citizens of Lampsacus had heard of the great philosopher from Athens. They knew about his teachings, his trials, his exile. They did not see him as a criminal. They saw him as a treasure. An official approached him, bowing. "We are honored," he said. We have prepared a house for you. You will want for nothing here." Anaxagoras was speechless. He had expected hostility, or at best indifference. Instead, he was being welcomed as a hero. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you welcome me?" The official smiled. "Because we value wisdom here," he said. "Because we know that the truth is worth more than the opinions of angry men." The house they gave him was simple but comfortable. It had a courtyard with a small garden, a study with shelves for scrolls, a view of the sea. It was perfect. Anaxagoras settled into his new life. He continued to teach, though now his students were fewer. He continued to think, to question, to write. The persecution had not silenced him. It had only moved him. The citizens of LAMPSACUS treated him with respect. They brought him food, oil, wine. They asked him questions about the universe, about the stars, about the nature of things. He answered patiently, grateful for their attention. One day, a delegation of city elders came to him. They had a request. Would he be willing to establish a school? A place where young men could come to learn philosophy? Anaxagoras agreed. It was not the academy, not the lyceum, but it was something. A seed planted in new soil. He spent his days teaching, his evenings writing, his nights gazing at the stars. The same stars he had seen from Clazomenae, from Miletus, from Athens. They were still there, still burning, still asking their silent questions. And he was still here, still asking with them. The years in LAMPSACUS were quiet. Anaxagoras grew old. His hair turned white, his steps slowed, his voice grew softer. But his mind remained sharp, his questions as urgent as ever. He continued to teach, though his students were now mostly young men from the city and its surroundings. They came to him with the same hunger he had seen in Athens, in Miletus, in Clazomenae. They wanted to understand. He taught them about the seeds, about Nous, about the great vortex. He taught them to question everything, to trust reason over tradition, to look at the world with open eyes. Sometimes, visitors came from Athens. They brought news of the city, of Pericles, of the war with Sparta. They told him that his name was still spoken, that his ideas were still debated, that some still called him a criminal and others a sage. Anaxagoras listened, nodded, asked his own questions. How is Pericles? Is he well? Does he still rule with wisdom? The visitors answered as best they could. Pericles was aging too, they said. The war was taking its toll. The city was changing. Anaxagoras sighed. Cities always change, he said. People always change. Only the seeds remain the same. One day, a letter arrived from Athens. It was from Pericles. The handwriting was shaky, the words brief. Pericles was dying. He wanted to see his teacher one last time. Anaxagoras read the letter twice. Then he set it aside. He was too old to travel. The journey would kill him. And even if he could go, what would he say? What comfort could he offer? He wrote back. A short letter, full of affection and resignation. We have given each other what we could, he wrote. That is enough. Rest now. The seeds will take care of the rest. He never heard from Pericles again. The news of Pericles' death reached LAMPSACUS a few weeks later. Anaxagoras sat in his courtyard, gazing at the sea, remembering the young man who had stepped between him and an angry crowd, who had listened to his lectures with such intensity, who had become the greatest leader Athens had ever known. He wept, not for long, and not loudly. Just a few tears, quickly wiped away. Then he went back to his work. There were still questions to ask. There were still students to teach. There was still a universe to understand. As his own death approached, Anaxagoras thought about what would come after. Not about an afterlife. He still had no certainty about that. But about his legacy, his memory, his place in the world. He called the city elders to his bedside. They came, solemn and respectful, knowing that this was a farewell. I have one request, he said. When I die, do not build me a tomb. Do not carve my name in stone. Do not hold a public funeral. Just let the children have a holiday. The elders looked at each other, confused. A holiday? Yes, Anaxagoras said. Every year, on the anniversary of my death, let the children of LAMPSACUS have a day off from their studies. Let them play, let them laugh, let them be children. That will be my monument. The elders nodded slowly. They did not fully understand, but they agreed. It was a small thing to ask. Anaxagoras smiled. It was not a small thing. It was the most important thing. He had spent his life teaching, questioning, seeking truth. But what was truth worth if it did not lead to joy? What was wisdom if it did not make life better for the young? In his final days, he asked to be carried to the shore. He wanted to see the sea one last time. They brought him to a rocky point overlooking the Hellespont. The water was calm, reflecting the afternoon sun. Seagulls circled overhead. The air smelled of salt and freedom. He sat there for hours, not speaking, just watching. The waves lapped against the rocks, the same waves that had lapped against the shores of Clazomenae when he was a boy. The same stars would soon appear, the same stars he had studied all his life. Everything contains everything, he murmured. The seeds go on forever. Nous orders all things. His students, gathered around him, leaned close to hear. One of them asked, "Master, what is the most important thing you have learned?" Anaxagoras was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. "The most important thing," he said, "is that there is always more to learn. The universe is infinite. Our minds are finite, but we can stretch them. We can reach toward the infinite. That is what makes us human." He closed his eyes. The sun set over the sea. When they looked again, he was gone. Anaxagoras died in the city of LAMPSACUS, in the arms of his students, with the sound of the sea in his ears. They buried him simply, as he had asked, and they honored his final wish. Every year, on the anniversary of his death, the children of LAMPSACUS were given a holiday. But his real legacy was not in holidays or tombs. It was in the minds of those who came after him. In Athens, Euripides continued to write plays that challenged the old gods, that showed human beings struggling with fate, that asked the same questions Anaxagoras had asked. His tragedies were filled with the spirit of his teacher, the spirit of questioning, of doubt, of reason. In the Agora, young men still debated the nature of the cosmos, the existence of the gods, the meaning of justice. They used the tools Anaxagoras had given them: observation, logic, argument. They were his students, even if they had never met him. And in a quiet corner of the city, a young man named Socrates continued to ask questions. He had been disappointed by Anaxagoras' failure to explain purpose, but he had learned something more important: the importance of asking. He took that lesson and built a philosophy on it. The ideas of Anaxagoras spread beyond Athens, beyond Greece. They traveled with merchants and sailors, with soldiers and scholars. They reached Egypt, where they mingled with older traditions. They reached Persia, where they challenged the dualism of Zoroaster. They reached India, where they resonated with the teachings of the Buddha. Everywhere they went, they changed things. They made people think. They made people question. In later centuries, philosophers would look back at Anaxagoras and argue about his legacy. Some praised him for his insights. Others criticized him for his mistakes. But no one could ignore him. He had opened a door that could never be closed again. The theory of seeds would echo in the atomism of Democritus and Epicurus. The concept of Nous would reappear in the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle, in the theology of the Stoics, in the metaphysics of the Neoplatonists. The idea that the universe is intelligible, that reason can understand it, became the foundation of Western science. Anaxagoras had not discovered all the answers. No one ever does. But he had asked the right questions, and that was enough. When Plato founded his academy in Athens, he inherited a tradition that stretched back through Socrates to Anaxagoras. He had read the book on nature. He had wrestled with its ideas. Plato was critical of Anaxagoras. In the Phaedo, he has Socrates complain that Anaxagoras failed to explain purpose, that he gave mechanical causes instead of final ones. But Plato owed him a debt nonetheless. The theory of forms, that invisible, eternal realities underlie the visible world, was a transformation of Anaxagoras' seeds. The seeds were physical, the forms were metaphysical. But both were attempts to explain how the many could come from the one, how change could be real yet grounded in the unchanging. Plato's Nous, the demiurge of the Timaeus, was a direct descendant of Anaxagoras' mind. It too ordered the cosmos from chaos. It too acted with purpose, though Plato gave it a more personal character. In the gardens of the academy, students debated these ideas. They argued about whether the forms were separate from things, whether the demiurge was a god or a metaphor, whether Anaxagoras had been right or wrong. The debates would continue for centuries. Aristotle, Plato's greatest student, took a different path. He rejected the forms, but he kept the seeds. In his physics, he developed a theory of elements and qualities that owed much to Anaxagoras. He even preserved the term homoiomers to describe things with similar parts. But Aristotle was also critical. He thought Anaxagoras had not gone far enough, that he had failed to develop his insights systematically. He corrected him, refined him, built upon him. The Lyceum, Aristotle's school, became a center of empirical research. Students collected data, dissected animals, observed the heavens. They were following the method Anaxagoras had pioneered. Look, question, think. Through Aristotle, the ideas of Anaxagoras entered the mainstream of Western thought. They were translated into Latin, into Syriac, into Arabic. They traveled to Baghdad, to Cordoba, to Paris. They shaped the science of the Middle Ages, the philosophy of the Renaissance, the physics of the modern era. The seeds had scattered far indeed. The seeds did not stop with Greece. They traveled. When Alexander conquered the East, Greek philosophy spread with his armies. The libraries of Alexandria filled with scrolls, including the works of Anaxagoras. Scholars from Egypt, Syria, and Babylon studied them, debated them, translated them. In the 3rd century before our era, a Greek philosopher named Epicurus developed a theory of atoms that echoed Anaxagoras' seeds. Like Anaxagoras, he believed that the universe was made of tiny, indestructible particles. Like Anaxagoras, he believed that these particles moved according to natural laws, not divine whim. In the 1st century before our era, the Roman poet Lucretius wrote a long poem on the nature of things that popularized Epicurean philosophy. He never mentioned Anaxagoras by name, but the influence was there. The seeds had crossed another border. In the early centuries of our era, Neoplatonists like Plotinus and Proclus studied Anaxagoras carefully. They found in his Nous a precursor to their own concept of the One, the ultimate source of all reality. They wove his ideas into their intricate metaphysical systems. When the Roman Empire fell, many Greek texts were lost in the West. But in the East, in Constantinople, in Baghdad, they survived. Syriac Christians translated them into their language. Arab scholars translated them into Arabic. In the 9th century, the Caliph Al-Ma'mun founded the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. Scholars gathered there to translate and study Greek philosophy. Anaxagoras was among them. His ideas influenced Arab philosophers like Al-Kindi and Al-Farabi, who integrated them with Islamic theology. In the 12th century, these Arabic translations reached Europe through Spain and Sicily. Latin scholars like Adelard of Bath and Gerard of Cremona translated them back into the language of the West. Anaxagoras was read again, studied again, debated again. The seeds had crossed mountains and seas, had survived empires and religions, had traveled through centuries. They were still alive, still growing, still bearing fruit. In the 16th century, a Polish astronomer named Nicholas Copernicus proposed a revolutionary idea. The Earth was not the center of the universe. It moved around the sun. He did not know it, but he was following in the footsteps of Anaxagoras. The sun was a stone, Anaxagoras had said. The Earth was a stone too. Both moved according to the same laws. A century later, Johannes Kepler discovered that planets move in ellipses, not circles. He was a Pythagorean at heart, but his methods were Anaxagorian. Observe, measure, calculate. Galileo Galilei built a telescope and looked at the moon. He saw mountains and valleys, just as Anaxagoras had predicted. He saw that the moon was a world, a place, a landscape. In the 17th century, Isaac Newton formulated the laws of motion and universal gravitation. He showed that the same force that makes an apple fall makes the moon circle the earth. The universe was unified, intelligible, mathematical. Anaxagoras would have understood. He would have approved. In the 19th century, geologists began to study the rocks beneath their feet. They found fossils, evidence of life from millions of years ago. They developed theories of evolution, of change over time. Anaxagoras had taught that everything contains everything, that the seeds of all things are present in all things. Modern biology, with its DNA and its cells, its evolution and its genetics, is a fulfillment of that intuition. In the 20th century, physicists discovered that matter is made of atoms, and atoms of smaller particles, and particles of energy. They found that the universe is vast, ancient, and mostly empty. They found that we are made of stardust. Anaxagoras had said the same thing 2,500 years ago. The stars are stones. We are made of the same stuff as the stars. Today, when you look up at the night sky, you are seeing the same stars Anaxagoras saw. They are still burning, still asking their silent questions. And we are still here, still asking with them. What is the world made of? This question drove Anaxagoras from Clazomenae to Miletus, from Miletus to Athens, from Athens to LAMPSACUS. It drove him through poverty and wealth, through friendship and exile, through triumph and tragedy. He did not find the final answer. No one ever does. But he found something more important. He found that the question itself was worth pursuing, that the search was its own reward. He taught us to look at the world with open eyes, to question authority, tradition, belief, to trust reason, evidence, observation, to be humble in the face of the unknown, but never to stop seeking. He taught us that the universe is intelligible, that we can understand it piece by piece, question by question, generation by generation, that the work of one philosopher is never finished, but carried on by the next. The seeds he planted have grown into a mighty tree. Its branches are science, philosophy, reason itself. Its roots go deep into the past, into the minds of all those who have ever wondered why. Tonight, as you lie in the darkness, preparing for sleep, think of Anaxagoras. Think of the boy on the causeway in Clazomenae, listening to the whisper of the tide. Think of the man at Aegospotami, touching a stone that fell from the sky. Think of the old philosopher in LAMPSACUS, watching the sun set over the sea. He is gone now, 2,500 years gone. But his questions remain. They are in the stars you see through your window. They are in the air you breathe. They are in your own mind, asking, wondering, seeking. What is the world made of? You may not know the answer. No one knows the whole answer. But you can join the search. You can add your questions to the endless chain. You can become part of the great conversation that began with Thales and Anaximander, that continued with Anaxagoras and Socrates, that will continue as long as there are minds to wonder. Close your eyes now. Let the questions float free. Let them carry you into sleep, into dreams, into the vast and beautiful mystery that is the universe. The seeds are everywhere. Nous orders all things, and the question never ends.